What sort of the vision that you have once that American primacy weakens?
France to Germany, local, national, and nativist suddenly have no boundaries at all, no barriers to their action. We're no longer imposing limits on your military. If Japan wants to pick a fight with China over its old colony, Taiwan, how Japan wants to deal with North Korea, that is no business of the US.
What do you think the biggest mistake Japan could make in next 20 years?
China has a doctrine of peaceful rise. I don't think China is thinking in particularly militarily aggressive terms. Oh, we're going to basically replace the role of American foreign policy and be like, we are the defenders of Taiwan. We will go to war in Taiwan. That's retarded.
What sort of the vision that you have once that American primacy weakens? What will be the balance of great powers or competing spheres of influence or something more unstable? Do you think there'll be a stable global order without America being the center?
I think that we're actually in a perfect position to rediscover the principles of Emmerich de Vattel, his classic book, The Law of Nations. I think Vattel, for instance, could very easily negotiate a peace agreement between the US and Iran. In the case of Iran, which can't really be overthrown effectively, go back to the rules of Vattel and really treat it as a sovereign power. Take that seriously. Don't try to constantly sponsor revolutions in Iran and don't basically the Iranians, I don't think want, nuclear weapons or missiles or any of these things. What they want is sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And if you could actually guarantee them their sovereignty, and that was actually a meaningful promise, they wouldn't need to waste their time building nuclear bombs. But actually, when that becomes the credential, then they're going to do that. So actually give them what they want, which is something that you can give them. And then they won't want to take these things that they don't really need that are very offensive, like pointing missiles at everybody and building nukes. Yeah, I think that's the key to an Iran deal. I think that sort of thing is also key to working with Russia and China, is to basically just treat them as just have a normal multipolar order and stop being aggressive toward them. Now, in the case of the Western allies, that's a different situation. In the case of the Western allies, essentially, there was a remarkable contrast between the Vance speech in Munich and the Rubio speech in Munich. The Rubio speech in Munich was basically saying, we're going to use American soft power to push right instead of left. We're going to promote American values, Western values, whatever. They loved it. They loved the speech because basically what that said to the bureaucrats is America is still there. America is still working with you. The Vance speech had more of this slight flavor of a Gorbachev doctrine, 2% Gorbachev doctrine. We don't really care as much as we used to, and you can kind of govern yourselves however you want. Don't call us if you really need us, but we're busy. We have a lot of things to do. Mm-hmm. America created the legitimacy of these systems. It is in a position to withdraw that legitimacy very, very dramatically, very, very easily in ways that are much, much bigger than anything even Vance talked about. The message that sends to France, to Germany, is to say that any entities that are inherently local, national, and nativist suddenly have no boundaries at all, no barriers to their action. So, for example, if you're really saying that to France and you really mean it, you're basically saying, for example, there was this event maybe a year and a half ago, I think, where 50 French generals signed a petition to the French government saying in very vague terms, this can't go on. And something like that. And it was just, and here are our names. And the implication was, you can't fire us all. And the French government was like, yes, actually, we can fire you all. And what did you say? What was going on? Right. In a world where those generals realized that if they, as in France in the 1960s, just take control of the streets, their banks are not going to shut down. They're not going to be kicked out of the international community. Their ATMs are not going to stop working, right? If America says to France, we don't really care what your government is, 50 generals, it's communists, it's Nazis, it's Scientology takes over France, like whatever. Hey, Scientology, you took over France. We're going to deal with a new Scientology France. May we, and like, hopefully Scientology isn't against wine because we really liked your wine, right? That is the sort of like actual independence. Right. The reality of the U.S. relationship with France is there are probably 50 foreign service officers in Paris right now, maybe 30, 40, sort of reaching out their contacts across every level of the French elite and basically steering France through soft power. But if they get a cable from Washington tomorrow saying, hey, you have 2 weeks to pack up your stuff, here are your tickets home, we're selling the embassy, it's over. Like, that changes a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And like, basically, just the feeling of seeing USAID close just sent these incredible earthquakes around the world because all of these people sort of who worked for USAID and various local NGOs and contractors really just like felt not even just the money coming down on the sort of the prestige of being, a tentacle of this American establishment of missionary imperialism. And you basically turn that off, it changes the balance of morale because politics is all about morale. And when the Soviet Union said to, the Germans, hey, you can go across the wall, hey, you can do whatever, the morale of everyone in the East German government goes to zero. And the morale of everyone in Germany who wants a different government is just like goes through the roof because it's like now is our time. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, let's say that with implication to Japan. Right. You're saying to Japan, like, we're no longer imposing limits on your military and basically your relations with other powers are as they are. Hey, you want to get into the business of being Taiwan's protector against China. I'm personally not a big believer in protecting Taiwan against China. I think that the American official position is that Taiwan is a province of China. And that's my position also. However, if Japan wants to pick a fight with China over its old colony, Taiwan, that is no business of the U.S. How Japan wants to deal with North Korea, that is no business of the U.S. All of that is over. And so what that does in terms of domestic Japanese politics is it basically says anyone in Japanese politics who wants to basically use Japanese foreign policy to become strong domestically is totally free to do so. Again, basically, that faction becomes stronger. That always has the same impact on democracy because, even at the level of voters, they want to vote for something that is strong and happy and excited. They don't want vote for a bunch of losers that have just lost their overseas connection and feel like they're going to die. I mean, you can even go farther than that. There's a lot of both with respect to, to Japan and to Germany. There's a lot of very embarrassing, war secrets that can be disclosed unilaterally. It basically really, I think, change in some ways the dynamic of the way people would see that war. For example, I think it's a very strongly proven case that President Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor before it happened. You've maybe heard this argument. It's a very well-grounded historical argument. And there's this wonderful book, for example, that I think everyone interested in the period should read. It's called Backdoor to War. It was published by the leading American diplomatic historian of the 1930s, Charles Callan Tansel. He still has full access to State Department files. And his thesis in this book is that Franklin Roosevelt started the Pacific War intentionally as a way to get into the European War, which he had also started intentionally. But their opponents, the Americans and the British, are by no means the soldiers acting in the armies of the angels.
There are actually Japanese scholars who talk about that as well too. Nori Kato, and then there's a couple of books on these things as well too. Yeah. Let's say that these historical re-understanding take place, pulling out of a certain military presence from East Asia take place. What do you think the biggest mistake Japan could make in next 20 years? We definitely don't want to go into war. We definitely don't want to. We want to have the peaceful relationship with China and then other Asian countries as well too. But
I think Japan is lucky in sort of coming back to sovereignty. Like, I think Japan is lucky in both China and Russia, because I think that these are not actually expansionist powers. Mm-hmm. You know, China is like, has a doctrine of like peaceful rise. You know, Russia is clearly like being very defensive about this feeling. Like, the idea that Kiev is not part of Russia is a fundamentally ridiculous idea to anyone familiar with Russian history. And like, you can't really get aside away from the artificial nature of like Ukraine as a country competing with Russia, especially when it's a military protectorate of Russia's enemies. It would be like, it's very similar to like Khrushchev fortifying Cuba. Aside from that, I think there is very limited evidence for any aggressive intent by Russia. I don't think China is thinking in particularly militarily aggressive terms. That's the right time to actually not, go for, we're going to basically replace the role of American foreign policy and be like, we are the defenders of Taiwan. We will go to war in the Taiwan. That's retarded, right?
Let me maybe ask you the final question. It's not immediate future, but maybe 10, 20 years. If 50 years from now, your ideas are judged to have failed, what do you think would have been the reason? I'm sure various reasons that could be thought about, but
sure. I think that most overwhelmingly, it would be there are a lot of things that are fail if they're done halfway or even 80%. If think about an airplane or a rocket, it's serious engineering. If your rocket gets 95% of the way to orbit, like the result is like a really big boom. This is why, no, the Trump administration is not anywhere close to doing this kind of thing. Has it been influenced by these ideas? Yeah, in certain ways it has been influenced by them, but it is not anything close to sort of regime change that I'm imagining. What is particularly tempting about the American Gorbachev doctrine model is that it was something that it would be a little harder to do now. It was something that could very easily have been done just at the start of the Trump administration. They actually had the power to do that because the president has so much more power over foreign policy. Forget first world countries like Japan and Germany. What's going to happen in all of South America, and they're already pushing in this direction, in all of South America, the generals realize we can just clean up the country completely. Like, we don't have to have these outrageous, like, favelas control, like Brazil. Brazil already really kind of wants in many ways to do Bukele, but like, if America basically was like, gave them permission on Tuesday, they do it on Thursday. That's the sort of importance of soft power in kind of protecting these third world countries. Everywhere you see that soft power has lapsed, the country gets better radically. And like, we really thought we would make the European empires better by taking them over and turning them into the third world. The third world was actually an optimistic term at one time. And instead, we just took them over and wrecked them. That's one of the things that if you're saying, hey, France, you can do what you like, you're also saying, hey, France, you can do what you like, not just in France, but also in Algeria, not just in Algeria, but also in Senegal. If you want your empire back, you can have it. I don't think the Senegalese will give you a lot of problems with that. I don't even think the Lebanese would give them a lot of problems with that. What you'd see with an American Gorbachev doctrine is you would see that by turning this government project off, this like gain of function diplomacy, it's trying to make the world a better place. And you just like stop. And like within months, everywhere in the world is a better place.
Thanks very much. It's definitely a lot to process. So thank you very much for this interview, and hope a lot of people will read it and then critically engage in this book and come to Japan sometime. All right.
I will.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right. Pleasure. Great pleasure.
PIVOT アプリでは動画視聴でマイルが貯まり、豪華特典に応募できます。Amazon ギフト券や図書カードなど特典は毎月更新しています。さらにバックグラウンド再生やダウンロード機能により、ながら視聴やオフライン再生にも対応。すべて無料でご利用いただけます。ぜひ PIVOT アプリをご活用ください。